Have you ever wanted to play as a cyborg Anubis, wielding lightsabers in an ARPG, while also having a droid's energy shield? Then this build is perfect for you. With the lightsaber in one hand and our cyborg battle extension in the other, we can slash through any enemy that dares to face us. If they get too close, they'll have to deal with our energy shield and will be impaled by a ring of spears at the same time. And if all of that isn't enough, we can unleash devastating T-energy to obliterate the entire screen with fire, ice and magic damage all at once. So let me guide you through the steps to enjoy this wild experience. Starting with our attributes. I'm also gonna drop in the character editor so you can easily see the raw stats of this build. We allocate 120 points into strength to increase the damage of strength-based melee weapons, plus we also increase our attack value, which in return increases our chance to hit. Then 150 points into vitality to establish a solid base health level. And the remaining points go into willpower to enhance our energy shield, boost lightsaber damage and improve our spell resistance. For the first 50 levels, I would switch between strength and vitality on each level up, and after 50 start including willpower. If you prefer to play with ranged weapons, switch to dexterity instead of strength. And it's also important to note that the Temple Guardian can't use any two-handed weapons or dual wield. That's because one of his arms is either occupied with an energy blaster or the battle extension. Next up, skills. Once again, I'll show you the raw stats in the character editor, so you can see the points I've allocated without the large boosts from equipped items. I have mastered every skill with at least 75 points, because the additional benefits are always worth it. Starting with blacksmithing. At first glance, this might seem unnecessary, since blacksmith NPCs are available in every town. However, it offers much more than just the ability to craft anywhere by pressing a button. The real advantage is unlocking the full potential of blacksmith arts and the ability to place rings in bronze and better slots instead of silver or better, and amulets in silver or better slots instead of only gold slots. Additionally, the stats of socketed items are increased. And once the skill level is high enough, you can remove the items anytime without having to worry about losing them. And this doesn't just benefit the Temple Guardian. You can also use the blacksmith function to socket items for all of your other characters. Next we have the Devout Guardian focus. Putting points into it allows us to choose modifiers in the Devout Guardian aspect. And it also significantly improves their regeneration time. The same goes for Tactics lore, which also grants us points in the Devout Guardian aspect, while increasing our weapon-based damage and critical hit chance. Armor lore is essential for nearly every build. It reduces regeneration time, greatly boosts armor value, and mitigates the negative effects of wearing heavy or high-level armor. Next, I chose to focus on sword weapons, because I enjoy using the lightsabers. If you prefer hafted or ranged weapons, you can select those instead. Choosing a weapon focus isn't just about the damage bonus. It also significantly increases attack speed, which directly impacts the execution speed of our weapon-based combat arts. The Source Warden lore and focus grant us again modifier points for our aspect. The lore increases the damage, chance to crit and execution speed of our combat arts, while the focus reduces the regeneration time. The Source Warden aspect provides a range of utilities for dealing with large groups of enemies, while offering passive buffs, healing and even weakening our enemies, but more on that in the combat art section. If you prefer a pure melee character or a ranged build without any spell usage, you could swap those two skills with toughness for more armor and damage reduction and something like bargaining, making this character your smith and trade specialist. Energy shield lore is a no-brainer. It ensures that your shield can absorb a good amount of damage before you need to worry about anything. Combat Discipline boosts the damage of our combos, while further reducing their regeneration time. If you want to follow the build, including the Source Warden lore and focus, but you are struggling with survivability, then you can replace the Combat Discipline for Toughness, since you will still deal enough damage. And finally, we have Constitution. It adds a substantial amount of health, so if your energy shield ever fails, you won't be taken out in one hit. Next, let's dive into our combat arts and modifiers. Before we begin, I should mention that I'm at max level with good gear, so the number of runes I've read should be adjusted according to your level and the regeneration reduction you have from skills and items. Using the character editor, you can easily experiment with higher combat art levels or scale them back if needed. For a dedicated blow, I chose the transformation modifier, which doubles the damage dealt based on the enemy's weakest element. If you've watched my beginner guide, you know that weapon-based combat arts are imbued with the element of your weapon. So by targeting the enemy's weakest armor resistance with the right weapon, you will be able to deal massive damage with this modifier. Next, I selected critical hit chance, because we can deal with the chance to hit with the values from our items, our strength attribute, and a maxed out combat alert buff. Finally, I picked the enforce modifier, as we will be able to apply deep wounds from other sources. The battle extension isn't just a combat art. If it's in an active slot, it will passively attack and grant you a chance to double hit with melee attacks. So if you use it in a combo, make sure to place it in the first slot, so it stays active at all times. If you put it in the second slot, the extension won't be active. For the first modifier, go with the double attack option, which also applies to ranged weapons. For the second one, I chose again double attack, as we can counter the enemy's evade chance through other means. And the third modifier should be hemorrhage, which gives us a reliable way to apply open wounds without having to use specific items. In Deathly Spears, we choose gore. The knockback sounds fine and could be interesting for a more tank focused build, but if you want to optimize damage, then you definitely don't want to push enemies back. While the damage increase from gore rarely applies to us, thanks to the energy shield, it's still the better choice. The next choice is between additional fire or magic damage. Honestly, it doesn't make a big difference, since it's just a fraction of the total damage. You can go here with whichever one you prefer. Lastly, we select Impale to inflict deep wounds. This is also the reason why I didn't choose it for a dedicated blow. Thanks to the AoE effect of the spears, this mod will apply deep wounds to all surrounding enemies, not just the ones we target individually with the dedicated blow. The combat alert buff will be our main source of attack value, which is crucial for any weapon-based build. That's also why I chose this as my first mod, to further increase this stat. Next we take the melee reflect chance, since that's much more beneficial than the small HP regeneration, especially with an active energy shield. And for the last mod, you don't really have to choose anything. One is party protection, which applies the buff to nearby allies, which you probably won't have, since the normal multiplayer servers are offline. And the other choice is to make it into a permanent buff. But if you choose that, you would need to choose concentration as one of your skills, to have 2 or 3 buffs active at the same time. Plus at the maxed out level, you can keep this temporary buff active almost continuously. So it's really unnecessary to make it a permanent buff. Lastly, in the Devout Guardian aspect, we have the energy shield buff, which is essential for any Temple Guardian build. Without it, survivability would be a major issue. For the first choice, go with power, as the increased shield capacity is far more valuable than a minor damage pulse. Next, choose reduction, since flat damage reduction is one of the strongest defensive stats you can have, and while the regeneration in combat might sound appealing, it doesn't hold up to the enemy's damage, especially on higher difficulties. Finally, select reflection. A 15% plus 1% per level chance to reflect spells is incredible. With this buff alone, we don't really need to worry about spells anymore. I mean, just look at his defenses now. They are really impressive. We aren't utilizing Lost Fusion, but we've invested heavily in Source Warden. We will mainly use Mutation to apply attribute decreases on bosses or elite enemies. Next, we have one of our major AoE spells. You have two options here. Either go for DPS or defense. I chose to fully focus on offense. First by increasing the fire damage instead of lowering attack speed. Then by reducing enemies' fire resistance instead of the ice damage mitigation. And finally by making the spell last longer. And I chose the exact same loadout for the ice version as well. It's important to note that you can't have both active simultaneously, even if they are at the same spell level. So choose which one you want to use, based on the area you are in and the enemies you are facing. As you can see, the spells are overriding each other. In Charge Crit, I chose higher base damage and healing, but here you could also choose the other mods. They are decent as well. However, I strongly recommend selecting the mod that makes it last longer, since the range increase isn't as crucial. Because unlike the other two skills, Charge Crit follows the character around. Let's now go quickly over the combos. In my first slot, I have Deathly Spears, because I found it's much more effective to use it by itself instead of combining it with stuff like Dedicated Blow or Battle Extension. You might think why I put a single combat art in a combo. That's because of the combat discipline skill, which reduces our regeneration time and greatly increases their damage. In my second slot, I have the Battle Extension and Dedicated Blow combo. This will be our main way to attack. In the third slot, we are using the Primal Mutation. In the fourth one, our Combat Alert buff. And in the last one, we either use the Charge Crit and Fiery Ember combo or the Charge Crit and Ice combo. As for items, I went with the full Devout Guardian centered combat module set, which is also available in the base game. It offers great set bonuses, especially the final one, that provides flat life leech, a rare and valuable stat to have. For rings and amulets, I chose the Dryad set, introduced with the community patch. This set can be worn by any class, with the only exception being the trophy piece. The set provides excellent attribute and stat boosts, and some of the best set bonus stats you can find. Alternatively, you can look out for rings and amulets that enhance your regeneration time, armor, plus all skills, increase your physical damage, your critical hit chance, attack and defense value, and your attack speed. Another great choice for rings is a Tester Band, which increases your energy shield stats. And for sockets, I recommend the same stats that I just mentioned. Plus, look out for your attack and defense values. You can easily boost them with the blacksmith arts. The one stat I highly recommend looking out for is the regeneration per hit one. Try to wear or socket at least one amulet with that stat, or equip a weapon that has it. Speaking of weapons, make sure to have at least 2 one-handed lightsabers with different elemental damage types. I also like to use the Sneaking Demon Sword when casting AoE spells, since it increases our spell intensity. Additionally, I recommend equipping a one-handed ranged weapon to deal with pesky ranged enemies. The only sigil set I recommend you are always wearing is the ice-based one, since it has some really great benefits. But for the rest, I would suggest you check out the Sacred Wiki to see which stats you benefit most from. Otherwise, just use regular relics. And lastly, for the god choice, I of course select the Testa, the god of science. With this information, you should be ready for your Jedi Anubis adventure. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below, and check out my other Sacred 2 videos, including my recent beginner's guide.